Welcome back to Walk with TFB. Tim Bryson here, and as y'all know, I'm a Black millennial who is eager to have unfiltered conversation with authentic people centered on education, sport, and culture. Today, we are walking with a professor, vice chancellor, and Hall of Famer. An Atlanta native, she stayed close to home and began her educational career as a college athlete at Georgia Tech. After a couple years, she transferred to Stetson University, and while at Stetson, she earned both her bachelor's and MBA, while also leading the Stetson basketball program to their first NCAA March Madness appearance, an accomplishment I believe sealed her deal for her Hall of Fame induction. Our guest went on to earn her PhD in sport management from the University of Florida and has since worked at UMass Amherst in several leadership positions. Her research and expertise is focused on intersectionality, specifically at the intersections of race, gender, and sport culture. Over the last decade, she's become a leading voice in the sport management industry, publishing countless articles, appearing on international news outlets, and advising the future leaders of our generation. She's been my silent mentor for a while now, so I'm glad we finally get to amplify her voice and leadership on today's episode. So without further ado, y'all help me welcome Dr. Nefertiti Walker.
Thank you so much for having me.
What's popping, man? What's popping?
Everything, right? I mean, look at the world right now. The subways are flooding in New York City. Everything's popping.
I would agree with that. And I first got to say, thank you for joining our show today. When I first identified that education was going to be the theme for this season, you're one of the first names that popped up. And I'll share more about that a little bit later. But understanding what you just shared, but also what I think anyone can see, whether you have social media or not, there's a lot going on in the world right now. And so one thing I want to bring to this podcast, especially with this season, some new things, one of which is starting our podcast by asking, what brings you joy?
I love that. I actually just did a talk for the the Northeast Black Student Athlete Summit, where I gave a keynote on Black joy. Mm-hmm. So what brings me Black joy in general, but Black joy in particular? Lots of things, but in particular food. Like my mom recently moved up to New England, to Worcester, Massachusetts from Atlanta, and she has agreed to cooking for me and my partner 3 times a week. So that means, if you really think about that, that means if she cooks on Tuesday, so she's cooking Tuesday, Thursdays, and Sundays. Mm-hmm. So if she cooks on Tuesday, I eat Tuesday, and then we eat her leftovers Wednesday. And then she cooks on Thursday, we eat Thursday. If there's something left over, we eat that for lunch Friday, because we like to eat out on Fridays. And then when she cooks on Sundays, I'm eating that. So I'm not really cooking no more. So I'm happy. I'm loving it. So that absolutely brings me joy.
Meal prep mom. Meal prep mom.
Like meal I said, prep mom.
We hyped till I said that. But we hyped. Like I said, season 4, back and better than ever. We getting active. And this season, some things are going to be the same. And that's definitely the first segment. So before we go any further, of course, I read your bio. You have an extensive website, publication. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's dope, though. But in your own words, Dr. Neff, what is your story?
My story is interesting. I mean, I never thought I would be where I am now. I absolutely had zero intentions of being an administrator, had zero intentions of going into the chief diversity officer type of work. My goal, honestly, as an academic professionally, was to become a full professor. That was it. That was my goal. Become a professor, get tenure and promoted to associate, and become a full professor, and then chill. Chill, write books, write research publications, do some sort of popular press, scholarship type stuff, and sort of chill, write, do my thing, work out. I did not expect to work this intensely hard in my professional life. Yeah. And that may sound wild to some people, right? But I just didn't. I didn't expect to be an administrator. And even in this role now, I've been in this role for 2 years now as vice chancellor. And for the first year and a half, it was I'm still just served. I'm just trying to steer the ship until we get the person who's going to be in this role full time. And then finally something clicked where it was wait, this is an incredible opportunity. I am at a point in my life where I am willing to do the work. I'm willing to work hard and long to do the work that I think I need to do for marginalized folks on this campus. Um, and this is like thinking 10 years from now, to be able to say that I was given the opportunity, earned the opportunity to lead a campus through this moment that we're living in. When it, think about social justice advocacy work that's happening, a pandemic is just, I had to say, yeah, I had to do it. It was my calling, so to speak, right? Like I fought it for 18 months. And it was still here, and people were still encouraging me to consider it, and I did. So that's really been I mean, of course, my story goes back to college basketball and hoops, and growing up in Atlanta, as we say it. There is no T in Atlanta. South side of Atlanta, College Park, my story goes back to those days. But I would say for the moment that I'm living in, my story is, wow, this is not what I had planned for my life, but I'm absolutely happy to be here doing this work.
I mean, I'm sure UMass Amherst is happy. I'm happy you're doing the work. I'm happy for social media like Twitter that introduced me to you and your work. But as I look back at not just the bio that I read, but really Googling your name, right? Google is free. You think you're the first person on this podcast who has their own Wikipedia page, which I was like, yo, what in the world?
So that's wild. So I do know now, because I have a former student who's now a really good friend named Malcolm Ruffins, just got engaged. Works for CAA, awesome person. Just finished his MBA, not just finished, maybe a year and a half ago, he graduated, got his MBA at Harvard, like amazing guy. And he gives me, he was the first person to find out that I had a Wikipedia page besides me. And ever since then, it's like WikiNef this, WikiNef that. Someone reached out to me. I'm going to have to look it up while we're talking, the actual Twitter account that reached out to me, but it's like a Wikipedia Twitter account. And essentially what they do is they go after underrepresented folks, whether that be because of disabilities, race, ethnicity, gender, that they feel are worthy. And they hit me up and was like, hey, I want to do a Wikipedia page on you. And I was like, okay. Sure. I don't know what that means. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but yes, sure. And they're like, yeah, you need a Wikipedia page. I want to do a wiki page on you. Can you send me a picture and I'll do everything else? And I was like, okay. And that was it. And then they're like, here's the link to your Wikipedia page. Done. And this happened maybe like last summer sometime. So,
well, now we know more about that process. But one thing that stood out to me when I was on your page was that it said you chose to forego a career in basketball and pursue a PhD. And we're going to talk about this in a second, but I first want to start with, how did you get introduced to basketball?
My dad. Like, my first memory of basketball is I had to be 3 or 4, because we were living in Virginia, in Newport News, Virginia. And we left Newport News, Virginia when I was 5. So I know I had to be around 3 or 4. And my first memory of basketball is sitting on the court, on the side of the court in a tiny gym. I don't know if it was YMCA or if it was a church gym, but it was a tiny gym. And my dad sat me on the side of the court and they were running a game. And I was probably like, you know how it is in those tiny gyms where when you're on the sideline, you're basically against the wall and there's like a foot between you and the court. And that's where little 3 or 4-year-old Neff was sitting, waiting for my dad to play a pickup game, holding a ball, just sitting there waiting. That's my first memory of basketball. And my dad introduced me to basketball, and that was our thing. It became my family's thing to some degree. And I started late, actually, playing organized basketball. I didn't start playing until I was 11. Most folks, were playing from 5 or 6, but I played pickup. I played with my cousins. I played in my yard, but I didn't start playing organized until I was about 11. And it's absolutely because of my dad's love for the game.
And so why Georgia Tech, but also this transfer? I transferred too, so I love transfers. But what happened? Talk to us.
Lots, that transfer story is probably a whole nother podcast, to be completely honest.
Part two coming.
It's a whole nother, but Georgia Tech, because it was close to home. And it was, I was considering Georgia Tech. I was considering North Carolina. I was also considering some smaller schools like Western Carolina, because 2 of my teammates went there. So I'm like, oh, we can do the whole AAU, go dominate the small conference thing. San Diego State, some other schools that I was considering, but Kansas State, actually, that I cannot remember that coach's name without looking at the actual letter. But I mean, she wrote these handwritten notes that were just so personal. And she almost took this Southern ATL girl all the way out to the middle of nowhere, wherever Kansas State is. I think it's like Manhattan, Kansas or
Yeah,
something.
Manhattan. Yep.
She almost took me out there because of, how personal of a relationship we developed. But nonetheless, Georgia Tech, because it was 20 minutes from my house, my family can come and see me. And it was very familiar to me.
This is good. Okay. This is good. When we know the story, you transferred, led the conference, like free throw percentage. Would you shoot like 98, 97%?
91.2% is what I shot for my career. Don't foul me. Don't foul me.
Yeah, don't foul you at all. Took the team to the tournament, right? That's history. But again, I want to go back to this piece. Got to read it twice. Chose to forego a career and pursue a doc.
Yeah.
How did you even become familiar with the PhD degree journey process? Like, talk to us more about that process as well.
Talking to people, right? So I was always good at school without really trying. I paid attention in class. I grasped things relatively easily. I enjoyed learning. Growing up, in the hood, I had my group of band nerd friends, and we were always competing on who got the most A's. So for me, school was and my parents had high expectations. Like, I got a B minus, and they're like, why'd you get a B minus? You should have just gotten an A. Like, they had very high expectations of me. So school came easily. So when I was, thinking about like things that I wanted to do, I saw professors and I'm like, I kind of like the college atmosphere. I kind of like learning. I didn't know what research meant at that time. I just knew that I enjoyed teaching. I taught Sunday school when I was 16. I enjoyed learning something and then teaching it to other people. And I also thought that I might want to be a lawyer. So after I finished up my MBA, I was like, I'm either going to play professionally, I'm going to go become a lawyer or become a professor. And I couldn't decide between law school or the PhD. I actually studied for the LSAT, ended up not taking it because I was going through this process of like exploring what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be. And my dad's like, go talk to 10 lawyers and talk to 10 professors and see what they say about their life. And I got through like 5, 6, or 7 of them. And the lawyers are like 10 to 15 years, and then I'm gonna be coasting. But I have to grind it out, put my family second, grind hard for 10 or 15 years before I can reach that point to where I feel like I can take a deep breath and I've made it. And the professors are like, I love my life. Like, they were happy. They're like, yeah, I'm doing this little bit of research. They were coming into the office when they felt like it. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I want to do. Yeah. So that's how I chose the PhD route. And I chose it over basketball because I got a contract offer to play in Bonn, Germany, in their D1 league over there. Signed the contract, sent it back to my agent, faxed it back then to my agent. And the next morning I got my acceptance letter because I was still like, I always had plan B and C and D. So I was still applying to PhD programs, and I got my acceptance letter to the University of Florida the day after I faxed my contract to my agent in Bonn, Germany. And I was like, I can go play for $700 a month, which, I knew in a year or two I'd be making a lot more. But I'm like, or I can go get this PhD. No one in my family has or had a PhD. So I'm like, I'm gonna get the PhD. Like, that's going to be a bigger impact for my family. I'm going to have cousins that will play professional sports. I know it, right? I don't know if I'm going to have people in my family who will have the opportunity to get a PhD. So ultimately, I chose the PhD because I thought it could make the biggest impact for my family.
That's real. And I know a previous podcast you were on, you mentioned that Florida was a dope place, not just because it's still close to home, semi-close, but because of the faculty that were also there. So can you talk more about your decision-making process and really why you chose Florida, but also your experience while a doc student at UF?
Yeah, for sure. I chose Florida. I was choosing between, so I applied for fellowships, and I got this Florida Education Fund fellowship that paid for all of my schools and fees and paid me a $12,000 a year stipend that basically paid you $1,000 a month. So I was going to a Florida school, period, because of that. Like, my family didn't have a lot of money. This was going to be able to support me, allow me to support myself. So it was a done deal. I'm going to a school in Florida. And the way that the fellowship worked, any school in Florida that had a PhD program, they would, once you got the fellowship, they would basically pay your way. So then I just needed to get into a program, and I applied to Florida State and University of Florida because they had programs in sport management, PhD programs in sport management. And I ultimately chose University of Florida because of Dr. Sagas. Dr. Mike Sagas was there as a faculty member. His research at the time was looking into racial and gendered biases in college athletics in particular. That was fascinating to me. And my conversations with him was just chill. He was like, yeah, what do you want to do? I'm like, I don't really know, but these are the things that I'm interested in. He's like, oh, don't worry about it. You don't have to know. You're young. You're just starting a program. And I was honest with him. I'm like, I don't know a lot about research, but I know what inequity looks like, and I want to study that more. And he was like, you'll figure it out. That's cool. Like, you don't have to know. I'm like, I got an MBA. We didn't do any research. He's like, don't worry about it. You'll figure it out. And we just vibed. Like, his hands-off approach worked really well for me. When I needed him, he was there, but he wasn't pestering me. He didn't make me do his work. He didn't make me write his lit reviews. He allowed me to become the person, the researcher, the scholar that I wanted to become. And he just guided me. And that's exactly what I needed for my personal growth at that moment in my life.
That's real. That's super real. Like how you say, I know what inequity looks like. Because when people ask me what you want to do, I'm like, I mean, I know these people are getting screwed over, right? I know the international athletes aren't being thought about and or included in the conversation. So I definitely resonate with what you said about your experience at Florida. But transition as a segment too, what is educators, right? Talking about education. And one thing you mentioned at the very beginning was that you knew you wanted to be a professor, right? You knew you wanted to be a professor. You went down this route. Obviously, there are things that continue to been added to your plate, but really just have aligned with your purpose journey and purpose walk. But professorship was where you were going.
Yeah.
Why?
It's just in me. Like, whether it's professorship, whether it's coaching. I coached at Stetson for a year after I finished playing ball there. I enjoy developing, expanding my knowledge, and then sharing that with people. Like, when I learn something, I can't hold on to it. Like, I mean, even the smallest, like, I have a group chat, and you probably see it sometimes on Twitter, my people from my group chat, a group of colleagues who are professors, Dr. Antonio Williams at Indiana University, Dr. Kwame Ajaman at The Ohio State University, and then Elena McCauley, who's going to be a professor eventually. She's getting her PhD, but she's now the executive director for diversity and inclusion here at UMass. And that's my people. We have a group chat, and we're going at each other's necks all day long, but also building each other up and also expanding our knowledge. And I only share that to say that's everything that I learn every day. I'm sharing with those people, as well as my wife, as well as my family. But it's just in me. When I learn something, I want to teach it to other people. I want to share it with them. And, it's who I am. So becoming a professor is almost the perfect profession for someone who both loves to learn, but also loves to share that knowledge.
Between you and Wayne, y'all gonna get me applying as tenure track jobs when I'm done. I already said I'm not doing it. Don't try to reel me in.
You're not doing it. What are you gonna do then? What do you want to do with your PhD?
I've continued to be thinking about this, right? And I know one of the things that I've always have said since I started the program is that I want my research and stuff to be accessible. And I think you've done a good job. Well, if I can say so, done a great job of not just publishing, which is great, cool, but really being these like public facing environments and spaces that people can still learn from your expertise. And I really like that part. Now, the more you talk about teaching, I'm like, clinical professor sounds cool. Like, I don't want to write in an APA, but I wanted to still be able to disseminate what I'm learning. So to answer your question, I'm still figuring it out, exploring.
Yeah, no, I feel you. When like I said, when I started my PhD program, I didn't know what research, I didn't know. I walked into the program as a first year doc student. I had no clue what the difference between qualitative and quantitative research was.
Yeah, heard that.
No idea, no clue, no idea. And that's where I started, right? Like at the very, very bottom as far as knowledge about the field. And somehow I ended up taking, all sorts of hierarchical regression, structural equation modeling type courses, as well as diving deep in sort of the qualitative methodologies and critical discourse analysis and on and on and on, right? So that's my growth. But I only say that to say I got into this profession because honestly, I wanted control over my time.
Sure.
I wanted to be able to learn and do things at the pace that I wanted to do them, and as much as I wanted to, dive as deep as I wanted to, but also I wanted to be able to teach. I wanted to be able to share that knowledge. And part of the research and scholarship part that is really important to me is sharing it beyond Journal of Sport Management, where maybe, I don't know, 20 people in my field, maybe more now, but in the early days, maybe 20 people in my field will read that article, right? Like I wanted the work that I was doing to be shared with people who had the power and authority to change the lives for those marginalized groups that I was investigating and studying and spending time with and learning from, right? Like I wanted, if I found out that Black women who were women's basketball coaches were experiencing treatment discrimination, then I wanted the Women's Basketball Coaching Association to know about that. I wanted the NCAA to know about that so that they can then do something with that. And Twitter became a space where I could educate these folks on what I was learning. And beyond Twitter, I began to just create a website and write, there's a couple of articles that I wrote before I ever got published with Washington Post or anywhere else on my personal website that was reflections of my research. So it's very important, what you said resonates with me because it's very important that the work that I do is shared with people that can take it and enact change. So I think you can be a professor. I think you can be on tenure track and still enact change with your research.
We'll talk I got a few years. We'll talk. We'll talk before I get there. But one thing you said, right, and I think it goes back to what I said before about you being a silent mentor, which you said on Dr. Hummel's podcast. But between you and Dr. Cooper, Joseph Cooper, y'all have really modeled that for me, and I appreciate that dearly and deeply. Yet I was gonna entitle this season "Education is Power, Knowledge is Power," because I think there's some weight to that. But then when I think about education, to one thing you said before, right? There's a lot of inequities that are still in place in education. So I struggle to really name that. So as an educator, like what does it mean to be an educator in the year 2021 and doing this work within a system and structure that's still rooted in historic and systemic power? I'm assuming inequity.
It means you have to be courageous. I mean, you can be a professor in these systems that we know are rooted in systemic racism, that we know are rooted in sort of historical gendered ideologies, ableism. If you're going to be honest and authentic to who you are, and if you consider yourself an advocate, then it means constantly being courageous, constantly calling out the system for what it is, and then challenging the folks that you work with to do something about it, right? I mean, I'm in meetings all day with administrators and vice chancellors, and I'm not in those meetings saying, we're doing a great job and we're really sort of shifting the culture and, things. No, I'm like, it's still bad here for marginalized folks. It's still bad here for our trans students. It's still nearly impossible to walk on this campus and feel included if you're a Black trans woman. We have to do better, right? Like we have to talk to them and understand their everyday experiences so that we can start disrupting the systems that are making it so difficult for them to live, full lives. So you have to be courageous to do that. I mean, it's easy to go into your office and do your research and close your door and not talk about these things. If I did that, I would have 3 times the publications I have easily, right? Like very easily, I would have 3 times the publications I have right now if I did with what a lot of folks do, which is put your head down, do the research, get the pubs, and talk about the inequities as this abstract thing that you have no power or no agency to change. But I've chosen to not do that. I've chosen to do the research because it's what I want to do, and it's the culture that I want to be a part of. But I've also chosen to forego lots of research projects to spend my time, part of my time at least, using my agency to enact change, to make campus life better for folks who perhaps don't have a voice or a seat at the table.
So let me ask you this, right? Because that makes 1,000% sense. And I think we saw last summer, coming into this academic year, whatever, the story continues to be cyclical. But there was a lot of feedback, both public and at least my private conversations about why aren't more university administrators, leadership reaching out to whether it's higher ed or student affairs or sport management, experts, and pulling them into this conversation to help drive and, guide the boat to different places.
Yeah.
UMass Amherst obviously has done that, of course, by tapping you. You earned it, of course, but being in a role to where you can then shape what the future of UMass Amherst looks like from an inclusive and socially just environment. But there are a lot of institutions that are not currently doing that in different places. My answer is like, why? Because it seems to be too obvious. I'm sure service is part of that, compensation is part of that, but like, where's the disconnect?
That's a really tough question, right? And the disconnect, honestly, I'm going to be fully transparent here and say something that maybe some folks don't like or want to hear. The disconnect is on both sides. It's a lot of faculty who are doing really impactful, important research and have amazing insights on the inequities that are happening on college campuses do not want to take on a full-time administrative role. It's because if that's right now, I have 2-3 jobs. I have 2 to 3 jobs right now, full-time jobs that I'm trying to constantly juggle because I'm unwilling to give up my scholarship, my research, my working with doc students, my working with undergrad researchers. I'm unwilling to give that up. But I also have accepted and taken responsibility for a full-time administrative role. A lot of faculty who have that expertise don't want to work this much and they don't want to give up their passion to take on a full-time role as an administrator. And a lot of institutions don't necessarily want to give faculty these sorts of roles because they understand that faculty are coming in with a very critical mindset of the institution itself, right?
Yeah,
so it's sort of self-preservation for institutions to not appoint faculty like myself to these type of roles that are going to constantly criticize, agree with students, and push the institution to be something that it's never been and that it's never considered to be, which is like, for instance, anti-racist, right? So it's on both sides where you have to have faculty that are willing to either work double time or give up those third of their publications, right? Publish significantly less because they're spending more time doing the practitioner type work.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you sharing that. And it's one critique that I continue to have of just graduate program preparation in general is that we don't always talk about this, right? We don't always talk about the politics, the bureaucracy, the money as core classes in these prep programs. And so being someone who's now obviously with doc education, but working full time, I'm like, why didn't we talk about this in my master's program? Like why in this class required in my doc program? Because I think for me, listening and you speak is like, it doesn't set us up for failure, but it set us up to be misled by what we thought was true back when we were a student.
And what you thought was possible, right?
Well, that too.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's sort of this circle of inequities and parts of what the institution needs not being valued by the academy. So for instance, I'm fortunate that I have a lot of amazing collaborators that I work with. I'm fortunate that I have an amazing wife that allows me the time to do research on the weekends, and I haven't cleaned, like fully cleaned the house in, I don't know, a year, because she's like, don't worry about cleaning because I know that you're trying to go up for full soon. And I know that you need this research time. I cook because I'm a better cook. So I still have the responsibility of cooking, but so you have to there's so many things that have to work for you to be able to be successful in both worlds. Right. And I think what the academy needs to do a better job of is of recognizing that the academy needs faculty that are smart and that do good research to be administrators. And if they are which means they have to value in the tenure and promotion process service more than they currently do. They can't put all their eggs in the basket of scholarship, because if they do, what you're going to have are universities that are run by administrators that are disconnected from the research because you're not valuing that service in the promotion process. So it's a lot. It's a lot happening, and it's a lot that I feel like these conversations people are unwilling to have,
Sure.
because it exposes the system.
No, it does. I mean, to which I know I want to expose it, flip it, change it, whatever. But I mean, it's one of the reasons why I wanted you to be on this podcast, because we could talk about this higher ed piece. We can talk about this sport piece. We can talk about the cultural influence, organizational and otherwise. And so I want to bring us to the current state of higher education. When I was talking with Dr. Hilton at Kent State, Senior Vice President, Student Affairs at Kent State, and he kept saying, right, higher ed is an identity crisis right now, right, of recognizing who we were, but an unwillingness to really evolve into who we need to be and should become.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, like, where are we in higher ed right now?
I agree. I mean, you can take something as small as what the pandemic has exposed, which is our unwillingness to be flexible in just something like remote work life, remote learning life, right? Like that, take that one small thing, and that's a microcosm of what higher ed is dealing with right now, is the unwillingness to change and to shift along with sort of the socio-cultural things that are happening in the world that's forcing us to shift, right? Like you have the big corporations that are like, okay, we're closing down the building. We're closing down a third of our physical spaces because the pandemic has allowed us to realize that people can work from home and we can be more flexible, and hours are malleable. We can move their work hours from earlier to later. Like we don't have to have this 9 to 5 rigid system. Mm-hmm. And higher ed is like, we need everyone back on campus today. Right. And I joke because I'm a part of, these places where we're making those decisions. And I'm fortunate to be a part of a community here at UMass where we have leaders who are like, let's talk about this, right? Like, mm-hmm. let's not just say, okay, we're going right back to where we were January 2020. Like, mm-hmm. we're not doing that as a campus. We're like, let's talk through what people's needs are now and how their lives have changed and shifted. And let's be open and willing to shift the way we think about our campus community to fit those new different needs and those new ways of living. And I feel like, generally speaking, higher ed is as rigid to that as the NCAA has been rigid to name, image, and likeness, right? Mm-hmm. And then something happens and you're forced to do it. And it's like, oh, you could have done it a long time ago. And all you've done to yourself actually is stifled innovation and stifled your ability to be responsive to the future. So I feel like that's where we are right now with higher ed. I think you're exactly right in that we're at this point where I might say that we're not necessarily suffering from an identity crisis as much as we're suffering from the resistance to change. Like folks are resistant to changing in the ways that we know we're going to have to change. Like we can fight it because we're stubborn, but it's gonna happen. Like there's nothing we can do about it. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You're exactly right. I think what you're saying speaks to what you were mentioning on, I think it was ESPN Radio with Sarah Spain this past summer.
You really did the research, huh?
Come on, man. Come on,
you really did the research.
Listen, one of my future jobs is gonna be a full-time podcast host. If I did this shit every day, I'll be happy the rest of my life. But
I can tell you enjoy it. So,
it's just fun
keep doing it. Yeah.
It's fun. But one thing you mentioned, you said that you cannot ignore the power the U.S. has as it relates to talking about the Olympics, right? With both the swim cap issue, Sha'Carri's predicament. There's U.S. power in the world.
Yeah.
Is that something you talk about in sport management courses with undergrads and grad students?
I mean, I do, right? I don't know if others do, but I talk about power and agency and institutions' willingness to flex that power and agency when it benefits them, sure. Right? With Sha'Carri, it wasn't in the U.S. Olympic Committee's interest to flex that power in that moment. Exactly. If it was something that would have benefited more athletes. I mean, everyone abides by the rules for the most part, regardless of whether, being able to smoke weed, marijuana, cannabis, being able to use, I should say, consume, because people don't just smoke it, people consume it in lots of different ways. But being able to consume cannabis, like if that was something that the majority of athletes were fighting against, then we would, as a country, would have stepped up and supported Sha'Carri. But because the majority of athletes are just fall in line and abide by the rules, it's not something we're willing to fight for because we don't need to. We can use it right now to control their behavior. So why not use it to control their behavior when the ultimate goal of institutions really is to control behavior, right? So, yeah, I absolutely think that we could have flexed that muscle and supported her when she needed our support. But that's a whole another story of who we decide to support and protect, and who we sort of leave out to dry when they need us the most.
No, you're exactly right. And I think one thing, at least selfishly, personally, and for this podcast purpose, those who I feel like continue to be left out are international athletes, really international students in general.
Absolutely.
And as you spoke about the power the U.S. has, I think it goes back to not just policies and practices that are on our campuses, institutions, et cetera, but also in these strategic plans that each institution is coming up through the direction or leadership of their chief diversity officer. So yeah. I have you on the call today. We have you on the call today. And I'm just curious, like how, if at all, just based on your conversation, but also conversations you've had with other chief diversity officers, how is internationalization, international students included in the conversation about DEI on college campuses in the U.S.?
So we're working towards developing a African-American and Black advisory council at the highest campus level, because one of the data that we see on our campus supports the need for developing a group of folks that are just focused on race and racism. Like when I think about the incidents that come through my office, anti-Black racism, anti-Asian racism are the two highest categories of incidents that we see as a campus. So what that means is that we need folks dedicating more attention to it. Of course, we're thinking about it. I'm thinking about it in my role as chief diversity officer, but I'm also thinking about a million other things. And I only use this example. I'm getting to your international students piece of it. I use that example because a big part of our planning for this advisory group, for short, Black Advisory Council, is to ensure that we're considering the diversity amongst Black students, right? Like we often assume issues of race and racism on our campus and issues related to Black students are those rooted in American colonialism, anti-Black racism tied to chattel slavery, right? Yes, globally, yes, but those things manifest in very different ways for our domestic students versus our international students. So something that we're very cognizant of in creating this group or this council of folks is to ensure that we have people that are very aware and knowledgeable in how racism manifests for our international students. A Black student from Kenya is experiencing racism as well as other forms of bias in very different ways, but just as hurtful and harmful, or maybe more so in some cases, as our African-American students. Like we have to be able to distinguish the differences so that we can actually support their needs and not sort of come up with these blanket policies and procedures to address the needs of Black students without the nuance of understanding how our Black international students are impacted differently. So that's how that's one example of at UMass, how we're addressing the needs of international students. While also like it's nuance, right? It's all woven into the needs of Black students. When we think about ableism and sort of the intersection of ableism in the experiences of our international students, those issues are interwoven in ways that allows us to address ableism while also ensuring that we're allowing for space and nuance to address the specific issues around ableism that are related to our international students, whether that be language or otherwise. So you can't separate. I mean, I am fortunate that I've spent a lot of time thinking about intersectionality because of my own identities. And that's allowed me to do the work that I do for our campus in a way that acknowledges the intersectional aspects of race, racism, ableism, sexism, on and on and on, and how international students must have a voice, must have a seat at the table, must be a part of the discussion in all of those conversations.
So you mentioned you got 3 jobs. Obviously, you're doing some bomb ass work. How are you taking care of yourself right now?
That is actually my weakness. Like if I could speak to a weakness that I have, I used to be good at it. I used to like mornings was my workout sessions, jumping on the Peloton now, but that's not the same. Like I used to like go hard, right? Like I
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
did a figure competition back in 2014. So I used to go like
Oh,
hard,
yeah,
hard.
you was deep. Yeah, shoot.
Um, and it's fallen off because like you said, I have three jobs and it's interesting that you asked that question because September 1 was like, I've been spending the whole summer trying to get right, trying to like, okay, I'm going to make time to do personal reading for fun. I'm going to make time to, family. I have my dinner nights with my mom and my brother and all of that stuff. Like that stuff is scheduled, but I haven't been very good about scheduling me time. And what I did, I said on September 1, I'm scheduling my me time. So I have this little book and my me time is scheduled because I'm actually a much better researcher, teacher, administrator when I work out more, when I do self-care and make sure I get my time to go get I get my hair done. That's one thing that happens. Like regardless of what's happening, like you got to get that haircut at 4, I got to get my hair done. But to your point, I think is important. And I don't think I do as good of a job with self-care as I could and as I should.
Hmm. Well, that's a great transition to segment 3, which is how can I, but also our podcast listeners and community best support you, whether that's you as the human first and foremost, but also your work, your leadership. How can we support you?
I think keep doing what you're doing, right? Like, I mean, you asked me about joy, what brings me joy. And when I get on Twitter and I see you throw in one of your beer pop-ups, your IPA pop-ups at a local brewery, when I see you like in a fly outfit, you got on a fly shirt right now. So I'm sure the rest of the outfits fly too. But I see you had on this one outfit once that was like palm trees, maybe. It might have been a romper. It might have been a
Oh
jumper.
yeah, it was a
Was it a
romper.
jumper?
Yeah, it was a romper.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So when I see you like looking fly, looking happy, putting on these events that's bringing joy to people, honestly, that's helpful. Like joy, Black joy, whatever identity you have, finding that joy is what I think your pod, and the listeners can do for me because that absolutely feeds my soul.
Well, Dr. Neff, like I said, you were silent. We didn't talk about silent mentors. I'm gonna say that for the part 2. We talk about your transfer decision. I'll share mine as well.
Absolutely.
But yourself, Dr. Cooper, y'all are people who have been silent mentors who have shown me not just the way, but model doing it your way, right? Doing it your own way. And I just got off the phone with a master's student about 2 hours ago. He said, y'all want to reach out to you because you just seem to be having so much fun in your program. Like, I said, bro, we're just having fun. But I couldn't have modeled that way if I didn't see it from yourself and people like
Sure.
Dr. Cooper as well.
Sure. Well, like I said, I appreciate you. The feeling is mutual. I talk about silent mentors and how it's your responsibility to find them, right? And find people that fit your needs. And again, you are absolutely someone silently that is giving me all the motivation in the world to continue to do the work that I do. So keep the Black joy, keep being happy, keep having the podcast and, the beer pop-ups and everything else, because I love it. I love to see it.
Well, we're coming to UMass soon. Don't you worry about that. I'll buy your first beer.
Let me know. I'm there.
Well, before we bounce, it's going to be a new segment. I'm going to title it Before We Bounce, because why not? You also mentioned in that podcast with Dr. Matt, right? Flipping the switch. So I still see you as Dr. Neff, I always will. But I want to flip the switch and ask you a few questions before we bounce, if you don't mind. So first and foremost, what is your favorite sports memory?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Favorite sports.
That was a good one. I ain't gonna lie. That was a good one.
I have so many good sports memories to think of a favorite. Maybe it was after we won our first ever conference championship at Stetson, and the team got on the bus and we went back to D-Land, Florida.
Yep.
And we just had a ball that night. I mean, we went to the coach's house. We TP'd her house with toilet paper. She caught us. She didn't care. She was like, I see y'all out there. We were like, we don't care, coach. She's like, I don't care either. We just won. And we just had a ball. I mean, we were like all over the town. It's a small town, right? So they were like letting us have fun. And it was just that pure joy of doing something that's never been done before after grinding. That year that we won was the year that Florida got hit with like 4 or 5 hurricanes in a row. So we missed like 3 weeks of preseason because we didn't have electricity for 2 weeks. And it was just wild. So to go through all of that and still win in the way that we did was, probably one of my favorite memories.
That's dope. That's super dope. So I love music a lot, probably too much. Shout out to Certified Lover Boy as well. But top 5 artists of all time, your list.
Ooh. Well, Prince. So that's easy. Top 5 artists. See, yeah. I tend to Prince be biased for R&B, but I gotta spread the love.
It's your list. It's your list.
Queen Latifah, Jay-Z. This is hard. Top, because artists is like, I would say Whitney, but Whitney can blow, but Whitney didn't do a lot of writing, so
true.
And Whitney didn't do a lot of dancing, so I got to be true to like a true artist, right?
Fair.
Janet Jackson.
That's 5 right there. Janet, Whitney, Hov, Queen Latifah, and Prince.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll take that. I'll take that.
It's a different generation. Shout out to my mama for putting me on Jay-Z. I remember being like 4 years old listening to Blueprint, which
Blueprint was
that was a good one. If you could go to brunch with 5 people, you plus 5 bottomless mimosas, who you bringing?
Oprah.
That's a good
one. Michelle, not Obama, Michelle. Oof, these are hard questions.
These are fun questions. It's bottomless mimosas.
It's covered. So I gotta get with people that's gonna drink and have fun then. Okay. Rihanna. I want to know how she got to a Billy.
Yeah, that's actually a good one. No more albums.
Blue Ivy.
Actually,
because kids tell everything, right? So I want to know. I want to know the Beyonce and Jay-Z drama. So I don't want them there. I want Blue there.
Yo, that's a good one.
Blue gonna tell us everything that's happening. Ooh, and then who's my last one? Oh, LeBron. That's my guy.
He's my first pick. LeBron, yeah, he's my first pick because I feel like he got a lot to share. A lot that he want to tweet and want to say, but hasn't yet. It's okay.
I saw a picture the other day with him and Mike Tyson's son, and Mike Tyson's son had it on Instagram, and he was like, "I remember when I was 5, and my dad took me to see LeBron, and he signed this for me." And I'm like, and he let me watch him play video games. I'm just thinking, I'm picturing LeBron playing video games with his like friends, maybe 15 years ago, with Mike Tyson in the room. Like, what was happening?
Yeah.
What was happening where Mike Tyson's kid was watching LeBron play video? Like, that was wild. So yeah, LeBron, I know he's seen some stuff.
He's been chilling. And the last question for you, I'm stealing this from the All the Smoke podcast. But who do you want to see on Walk with TFB? Who do we need to bring on?
Who do we need to bring on?
You got to help me get this person, whoever it is, if I don't know them already.
I'm thinking, I would say my homie, my BFF, Dr. Kwame Ajaman, but I'm gonna go with Dr. Antonio Williams, aka Tonio, aka Moneybags, because he's living and working in a space where I feel like there just aren't a lot of Black folks in sport. Like he does research on branding and marketing, sport branding and sport marketing, a little bit of sponsorship, mostly in the fitness industry. And I don't know another Black person doing that work, period. So he just has his world, like the stories that he shares, like being who he is, a Black man who grew up in South Carolina, in that world that's mostly white and Asian, talking about issues related to marketing and branding of sports that are mostly Black, like basketball and football. Like, it's just fascinating. So I think you got it. And I will absolutely text him and tell him that you're going to hit him up and he got to show love. So
Give money back and a heads up. Dr. Money back and give him a
Dr.
heads up.
Moneybags. Dr.
Dr. Kwame gonna be on my
Moneybags.
next season. Don't
Oh,
he
good.
already he don't know that. We know it now, but he ain't know that yet. He gonna be my next season.
Okay, good. Hit him up too. Because he's trying to do some amazing things with he has this lofty, amazing, beautiful goal of starting a sport academy in Africa, and in Ghana in particular. So I'll let him tell that story. But yeah, my people are doing big things, as they say in the MBA and business schools, big, audacious, hairy goals, BHAGs. That's what my people got.
I like this. Well, like I said, first and foremost, thank you again for being on the show today. I know I learned some new things. You're very consistent, and not just your brand, but your story, and really your leadership and how you choose to lead. And so I want to say thank you for just continuing to be a model, not just for myself, but for others who either know you or will get to know you on this podcast. So thank you.
Sure. Absolutely. Anytime. Seriously. And keep doing the good work. We need you. We need your voice. We need your pod. We need you.
I appreciate that, Dr. Neff. But for everyone else, thank you again for tuning in to another episode of Walk with TFB. Definitely excited for this season as we continue to talk to more educators, right? And understanding what it means to be an educator in the year 2021 and beyond. Make sure that you rate our podcast on Apple Podcasts, 5 stars, and a bomb-ass review, but only if you mean it. See y'all next week. Let's walk.